hi everyone. So everything is being recorded, will be on YouTube by tomorrow, and they will also go on to bjss.com/Sheffield. Sarah is going to take questions at the end, so there is a Q&A section at the bottom where you can type in any questions. There's also a chat, so if you've got any comments, please drop in there. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Cornelius, and I'm a Service Delivery Manager and the Service Management Capability Lead at BJSS. So I've been with BJSS for just over a year, and it's been an absolutely fantastic experience so far. A lot of my previous service management experience is from the health industry, and it's been a really great opportunity, I think, just to apply my expertise into the various different industry sectors within the BJSS Managed Service space. It's quite varied. The team I work with are really high motivated. They're so committed and passionate about providing amazing IT solutions to business challenges. And I think what I've noted more than anything is there's a real sort of culture of continual improvement and adding value, and it is so infectious. So I'm going to talk to you today about the BJSS Managed Services. We have 12 live managed services across, like I've mentioned, various industry sectors. They're all cloud hosted and they're within AWS or Azure platforms. So quite varied, from NHS to some quite big retail brands. We've got government organisations and also financial organisations. And they all require very different levels of service and governance. I think being quite a client-centric organisation, it's quite vital for us that we really understand that organisational culture and the business requirements, and we need to understand those from the off, so that the frameworks we design work for each organisation. And I think it's also important to understand that the changing needs of a business are understood so that we can react to those appropriately as well. So I guess the title of the presentation, how do we approach these managed services and what can you expect from us? So I'm going to take you through the approach, and this is from the discovery phase, where we understand what level of service is necessary, and then through to the build and transition stages, where we create processes, we configure tooling, and we ensure everything is in place ready to support the live service. I'll then cover early life support and delivery of the live service, and then finally just talk about the ongoing piece. So the key approach that we'll use is agile, but this is from a service perspective. So as an example, I guess from a greenfield project perspective, the BJSS Service Delivery Manager will design, transition and deliver the service alongside the product and the infrastructure delivery teams. I think the SDM being engaged right from the start in the discovery phase enables them to work really closely with both the client and the delivery teams, so we can ensure that any changes to requirements are understood and we can reflect those in the service design as it's being created, but ongoing as well. So from a discovery point of view, we'll engage with the client to understand exactly what is in place at the moment, and that's for a brownfield site. Or from a greenfield site perspective, I guess what we want to understand is what's required from the client. But regardless of whether it's brownfield or greenfield, I think the stages we go through are exactly the same, because it's about understanding what the client needs are and where they'd like to be. And then we can design that suitable framework for delivery based on that understanding. So BJSS can offer consultancy at this stage, I guess offering recommendations in relation to suitable platforms and tooling, even support models, a lot more aside really. But this could be to replace what is currently in place, or it could be to implement something brand new. So with greenfield, I guess the required level of service is a bit more so guaranteed by the team. And this is because we can work really closely, like I mentioned before, from the off with the solution delivery teams at the really earliest opportunity that we can, to make sure that all the non-functional requirements are considered when the product is being designed and the platform is being architected. I think the key criteria that I'll just sort of run through to understand at this stage are going to be the service scope, which is, I guess, looking at which services will be required and ensuring that's all documented. A couple of examples of this might be, you know, will defect and problem management be required from BJSS? Some of our managed services require that, some don't, and it's just completed by the client. We'd also want to understand things like what support hours are necessary. You know, would it be a 24/7 support model, or would this be required just in office hours? The scope can be very much tailored to the client's needs. And we need to document those requirements as part of the SLA. So when we move on to the SLA, I guess that's a bit more detailed in terms of we need to then define and agree with the client and understand the level of service that's being required. So again, going back to those non-functional requirements, such as acceptable availability levels, we need to agree what that is. We also need to agree things like the incident priority levels. So we understand appropriate classification of incidents, how we classify them, and more importantly, I guess, how quickly we need to respond to each one and what acceptable resolution times will be as well. Next, moving on to the service design package. This will be based on ITIL 4. So BJSS, we will construct an operating model that will meet the changing demands of the client's business. So the way that we do this is ensuring that we've got those continual and regular feedback loops in place with the client, so we're able to quickly respond, change and adapt. So ITIL 4 provides, I guess, a more holistic and agile approach to service delivery, and we really do see the benefits that brings to our managed services. Ways of working are extremely important to achieve this too. BJSS use Agile Enterprise for our managed service, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on. So the service transition plan will be designed at this stage, and this would detail all the key activities that are required to move the service into a live state. I guess understanding timescales and then booking in contingency time is an absolute must, just to ensure that we mitigate risks as much as possible. And then the service acceptance criteria will be created and agreed with the client. This will then support the next stage, which is the transition stage. And again, it provides us that really important feedback loop from the client. The support model would be established. So we would document the appropriate roles and responsibilities that would be required from BJSS colleagues. And it's very likely this model is going to integrate with the client. So the responsibilities really need to be unambiguous and clear. So identifying appropriate tooling is really important. I will start off with talking about, I guess, the service management tool set, because that's probably the most important. So we need to be able to log issues. We need to be able to log problems and changes. So tools like ServiceNow, Jira Service Desk and Cherwell are just some examples of the tooling that BJSS currently utilise. These could be licensed to the client, or they could be a BJSS instance. Again, it's about what the client requirements are. We also need to consider at this point as well monitoring tools. So there's various choices of monitoring tools. There's the native products within AWS and Azure, of Azure Monitor and AWS CloudWatch. But there's also open source tools as well. So just to give a couple of examples, there's Grafana or Prometheus. Prometheus is an example of a tool that we use that gathers information around the service, and Grafana provides a dashboard view. Grafana is quite good because that's got built-in support for both CloudWatch and Azure Monitor. So for those people who aren't that keen on the native options within AWS and Azure, we can use Grafana just to provide a different dashboard view. There's also application performance monitoring solutions. Just a couple of examples there might be Datadog or New Relic. All these tools, or these particular tools, will come with varying cost and functionality. So again, the key is understanding what the client requires in the early stages so we can understand what they would benefit from. When working in the office, BJSS, we would set up all these sort of dashboards and display them on wall monitors. And this allows our colleagues to be able to have that visual aid for any unusual trends. Obviously, we're not just going to rely on the fact that somebody's going to notice a trend on a board on the wall. So what we also put in place is various alerting so that we can ensure that we've got that necessary responsiveness to events and incidents that are being highlighted by the monitors. So we use tools such as PagerDuty, there's OpsGenie, they're quite commonplace in the BJSS managed service space. And we also integrate the monitors into our communication channels. So we have Slack, we have Microsoft Teams, as well as the service management tool sets themselves, I guess, where we can actually automate the creation of incidents and events so that, again, they're just put in front of the managed service colleagues at the earliest opportunity. And all these tools really help us manage the services quite efficiently and effectively. So moving on to the build and transition stage, this is where we're going to follow the transition plan. So this was with a view to implementing the minimal viable service. So a minimal viable service could be in the form of incident management, problem management, change and release, and they might be delivered at the time of go live, and then at a later point in time, we can then build on the rest of the service that we need to implement. You might have heard of the minimum viable product before, and this is exactly the same concept. It's delivering something quickly, and then we can modify that and build on it over time. So the key activities that we're going to deal with in this stage is looking at creating the service manual and the run books. So this is documenting how the service is run from a process perspective and how the managed service colleagues are going to actually approach the delivery. I think the onboarding and the access control documents are quite critical to get in place right from the start. So I guess this for me is, if the managed service is going to grow or shrink quite quickly, we just need to make sure that we've got the appropriate access and training in place so we can get colleagues up and running as quickly as possible. Knowledge transfer and the creation of knowledge base. The knowledge base is also very important at this stage. When the service goes live, we need to be really confident that our colleagues have guidance of how to diagnose incidents and that they know and understand the service. So we would also be looking at this point at setting up all the configuration of the tools and the alerts. So for example, we'd be ensuring that the SLAs are configured within the incident toolset, so colleagues know which incidents to prioritize first and they understand how quickly they need to be fixed. The monitoring and the alerting tools also need to be configured. Now, this is quite a balance. I think we can set up too many alerts and then it just creates a whole raft of noise, and then it's really hard to prioritize issues, and priority issues can be missed. I think incorrect monitoring levels as well, they can also fail to identify an alert of high impacting issues. So I think it's a bit of a trial and error, but doing that really early on so we really understand what thresholds need to trigger alerts. And finally, I think the service rehearsal on key processes can give a lot of benefit. One rehearsal that I've been involved with was with an MI process. So this MI process required BJSS to be able to make contact with the client service desk to trigger their service bridge. But the number that we've been given to actually utilize that service bridge, it took about 20 minutes for somebody to answer. And when they did answer, they didn't have any clue who we were. And I think it was really important that we understood that and we were able to fix it before the actual service went live. So early life support and delivery is where the service goes live and it stabilizes. And I think there is an expectation that the efficiency of the service is going to drop after that initial migration or deployment. So this stage requires a lot of focus and agility by the BJSS Managed Service team to make sure that issues are fixed quickly, that we really understand those and we improve, just so that we're able to move out of that stabilization stage as quickly as possible. In the previous stage, the full managed service team might not have been put in place at that time, but now we would actually mobilize that full service team so that they can deliver the service that we've defined. We would then, over those first few months, we would very much closely monitor and review the service, and that's with a view to assess suitability. An agile way of working is extremely beneficial at this stage, and this is to ensure we've got that continual feedback from the client. I would expect a typical model to include daily stand-ups so we can ensure appropriate focus on production issues, as well as ensuring any blockers to fix are identified and moved, obviously. But also retros would be commonplace, so after any release and after any MI or any significant changes. And this agile way of working would be in collaboration with the client, so we can ensure, like I mentioned before, that continual feedback loops are in place and we're responding to change rather than just following a plan or a process. At this point, I would have expected to have the following structure in place. So this is a sort of typical managed service, how it might be presented. So we would have we'd be running a second line support function, providing response to incidents and service requests, as well as performing a problem management function. Many of our managed services, they run on a 24/7, 365 basis, and this is on a call out of hours basis. So that will be triggered by automated alerts from the alerting that I previously spoke about, or even from a phone call. And then we can have service desk staff, platform engineers and developers all available to resolve high priority issues out of office hours. And as part of that process, we can manage comms as well to any relevant stakeholders in appropriate formats at appropriate intervals that can all be tailored to the client's requirements. A third line support function would also include assistance from the same colleagues that we have developing the product, and that's to ensure that the functions that are creating and changing the product are also supporting it. And you might have heard of this referred to as DevOps. You can structure that in a number of different ways and a number of different formats. So such as a portion of the development team's work is allocated to service issues, or where we get developers and testers rotated into a single virtual team to accommodate this requirement. But I think whichever way it's structured, it's important that we do utilize that expertise in that manner, creating cross-functional teams where appropriate. So the platform support teams would be established or in place. They would cover both the test and production environments. These would be the team who will be configuring and responding to the monitoring and the alerting from the platform. They'd be responsible for any platform related incidents, and cost optimization of the platform would be a continuous focus for them. So just to give a couple of examples, of how this has played out in some of the managed services that we have in place. So one of our AWS managed services has recently started using database snapshots rather than full replicas as backups before completing a release. And this reduction is equated to a cost of £6,500 a month, which demonstrates quite a significant cost saving just with a simple process change. The change and release functions are also set up as part of the managed services, but these are very much aligned to the client's governance levels. We need to make sure that they're not too light or they're not too heavy, but again, this has got to be based on requirements and what's required from the client. And then finally, all of this is underpinned by continual service improvement. So finally, I just wanted to talk about continual improvement because this is so important at that final stage. So in the final stage, all support services should now be in place, and a framework for continual improvement should also be established as part of that. The CSI framework will ensure that a suitable tool set for logging improvements is in place. In the managed service that I lead, we use a Kanban Jira board for this purpose. The process will also ensure that we've got a regular awareness session, and that's normally completed by the service delivery manager to the managed service team, as well as the client and any solution delivery teams that are part of the overall project. Awareness sessions, these awareness sessions, I guess, will inform the colleagues of how to log improvements, what approach to take to implement them. And I think CSI, it requires engagement in it, I guess, action from everybody, which is why it's really, really important that there's that continual awareness around how to do it, what to do, and where to go. The activities and the processes that can trigger CSIs should be in place already, because that would have been set up via the service design. But I guess it's that engagement with the process and activity owners that's really, really vital to success. So for example, the MI process should trigger a retro with a root cause analysis to ensure that improvements are identified after every incident, but also, so we need to then make sure that the owner of that process has established those trigger points in place and is checking and auditing to make sure that that's being completed as part of the standard process. The CSI framework should also define the approach to take, and that's demonstrated on the screen with the blue blobs. I think it's really, really important that this approach is taken so that we baseline the current situation, so we understand what we're wanting to improve, and also we can measure success afterwards. I guess there's no point going to all that effort of improving things if we can't shout about it, about our successes going forward. So just to give another example, so on the screen, this is an example around another there was some feedback given from a release retro where one of our service delivery managers used Jira automation to create tasks that were required to manage a release process. I think what that gave them was a much better visibility of that process, and what they were able to do was reduce attendance at a daily release meeting. That gave them an actually £3,500 a month cost saving, as well as improving the actual quality of the release. and then the quality of the release, because that was improved, it also allowed them to introduce a more frequent release cadence. There's another example I wanted to mention, just around a suggestion from a BJSS platform engineer to utilize Argo smart routing in AWS, which delivers dynamic content around network congestion to improve performance. So that was implemented, and this provided a 20% performance improvement on the appropriate managed service it was applied to. That was absolutely fantastic. But what we also push our service delivery managers to do is to actually share some of those more transferable improvements across the other BJSS managed services. So with this is a really, really good example with the Argo smart routing of something that potentially other AWS platforms could potentially benefit from. So I hope my presentation was useful. I know it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope it was useful in just explaining some of the approaches that we take in terms of managed services, and I'll welcome any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sarah. That was a great presentation. So if anyone has any questions, please drop them into the Q&A box and we will try and answer them if we can. So we've had one through already while the presentation has been going on, and that is, you've mentioned that using ITIL version 4 brings lots of benefits to managed service framework. Would you be able to explain what those are in a little bit more detail?
Sure. I think from an ITIL v4 perspective, it sort of tries to push a more holistic approach to the whole framework. And I think the key things around that is probably the more agile way of working and those regular feedback loops with the client. I think for me, it's about, yes, we set up all these processes, but it's not getting stuck with just we have to rigidly follow these processes, and it's about how we can respond to change, and having those feedback loops in place and ensures that we have that understanding of the client's business changing. So we know that how that's changing sort of at those regular touch points, and we're able to respond really, really quickly. I think maybe a good example of this is probably COVID. Obviously, with COVID hitting, a lot of our managed service sort of clients were obviously hit with quite a significant business change, and I think certainly on the service that I work within, we have had to make a lot of changes to adapt to their needs. And I think we already had that operating model that was in place that allowed those touch points to be in place. So we were really at the forefront of understanding what's changing really quickly, and we were able to adapt to that, and we were just used to that cadence of a high level of change.
Thank you. We've had another one in. So how do you manage the resources in product development teams to ensure that they are available as third support without being distracted from product delivery work?
Okay, so I guess this, talking about probably the DevOps models. So obviously new enhancements and feature work is really, really important. And I think it's also very, very important that we get those teams involved with fixing sort of production issues. I think part of it is around making sure we've got those correct structures in place, and part of it is around so the teams know what they're working on and when. And I think it's also important to understand the priority of the production issues. So maybe some of the examples I could give would be the managed service that sort of I work within, where we have a team that leave the non-priority support issues till the end of their sprints, where we know the devs are less busy and there's more focus on tests. So we know that we're not distracting the developers at that time. There is another project that I know of that we have like a virtual team, and we just roll the developers in and out of that, so it doesn't create that distraction within the sort of development team. I think unfortunately, probably the worst one to try and manage with that is P1s. They are distracting, but we have to react to P1s. And I guess maybe I would say the approach of that is to try and increase the quality of releases, so we don't experience those P1s and they just don't happen. But we do try and control the P1 processes. So we've done a lot of work on some of the P1 processes that we have in my managed service recently to ensure that when a P1 hits, that we actually control who comes in and manages those P1s, so we've not got everybody rushing to help, and we control that a bit more, so we just bring people in at the right time, and we've got the right level of people looking at it and the right level of people still looking at those enhancements and future product updates.
Brilliant, thank you. And then it looks like we've got one final one, unless anyone's got any more. That is, do you always act as BJSS support, or can you be client branded support? And if you are client branded, how do you manage the user expectations in third-party delivery of the service?
Okay, I think in answer to that first part, it's both. I guess, again, it comes down to the client's requirements and what they're looking for. So that can be agreed, and we can go one way or another. The client I'm involved with, we are branded as BJSS. And I think that has brought confusion, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I guess, with the service rehearsal. That was a really good example of where it wasn't understood who we were. So I think in answer to the question, it's important at the discovery phase that BJSS understands what the client's wider landscape is, who all those sort of key stakeholders are, and then we can make sure that we've done the necessary awareness sessions around, what the support models are, where BJSS sort of have responsibility, and just, yes, who we are and what we do. And then as part of the service rehearsals, I guess any things that we might have missed in that instance, obviously we had, it brings to light anything that needs to be picked up.
Amazing, thank you. Great answer. So that seems to be the end of the questions. So thank you very much for your time today, Sarah. That was really interesting to listen to, especially from my point of view. If anyone has any more questions, please go to bjss.com/Sheffield and you'll work out how to get in touch with us. But for now, thank you very much and have a lovely day.